Pat Robertson, the minister and television broadcaster who led the transformation of evangelicals into a political force in American politics, died today at the age of 93. He's the son of a former senator. Robertson's 1988 presidential run mobilized evangelicals to the conservative cause on a scale that had not been seen in modern politics, and it brought him to a shockingly strong second-place finish in the Iowa caucuses back then. Here's Robertson on Meet the Press just before he became an official presidential candidate.
Is that your intent, to convert every American to Christianity?
Certainly not in the political realm. Teddy Roosevelt had this rather interesting statement. He called the presidency a bully pulpit. And it's a place where you can draw together a moral consensus for noble goals. I think if there's one job a president can do, more than others can't do, is to elevate the people and draw consensus. And I don't think that's the same thing as converting everybody to Christianity.
His presidential defeat only turned his Christian coalition into a more potent force, driving turnout for conservative candidates in that historic 1994 midterm election and it turning evangelicals into a key constituency of the GOP. Robertson also used his long-running television program to make many outlandish and sometimes hateful accusations, such as blaming Hurricane Katrina on God's anger over abortion and concurring with similar remarks made by Jerry Falwell on the September 11th attacks. Robertson also told viewers that God would intervene during Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 election. Joining me now on set, NBC News national political correspondent Steve Kornacki. He's also author of the book Red and the Blue, the 90s and the Birth of Political Tribalism, which deals with this era of American politics. Steve, it's always a lot of fun to talk a little political history with you. My first introduction to Pat Robertson, I remember watching this ad with Roy Rogers in 1986. Let me play an excerpt of it.
Folks, we all know this nation's freedom was founded under God.
So join Dale and me as members of the National Committee to draft Pat Robertson for president. He's capable, he's qualified, and he cares. America needs Pat Robertson. So let's prove to Pat that we're ready to help.
Yeah. Roy Rogers, back in the day, yeah. I mean, you know, Trigger was his horse. He was sort of a Western, I don't know how else you would describe him. I guess a Western pop culture icon.
Sure, yeah.
Back in the day, and he and his wife, Dale Evans, they were a variety show staple. You might see him on Hee Haw back in the day, or maybe back then, maybe the Mandrell sisters might have hosted them, right? That was all new to us back in the 80s. And then you wrote about how powerful, I mean, Robertson really turned it into a force.
Yeah, and you mentioned it. It was the moment, the high watermark for Pat Robertson politically was the Iowa caucuses in 1988.
He did nothing else after that in that campaign.
Yeah. He had some straw poll wins and everything, but what it did was it marked the arrival of evangelical Christians as a distinct force in Republican politics. He's been coming for a while. Mm-hmm. Jerry Falwell had started the moral majority in the late 70s. Robertson obviously had been involved.
And arguably, Jimmy Carter won because
of
he
support
was the
from
first
evangelical Christians.
Believer or born-again nominee of any party, and he mobilized evangelicals on his side.
And the disappointment of evangelicals like Jerry Falwell in Jimmy Carter as president is what led them to Ronald Reagan. And ironically, I point to that 88 second-place finish. To put that in context, second place, why was that so significant? Because third place was the sitting vice president, George H.W. Bush. And that Robertson defeat of Bush nearly derailed Bush in 1988.
It wasn't for a snowstorm in New Hampshire.
Yep.
I don't think George H.W. Bush is the nominee. Bob Dole's the nominee in 88 without that snowstorm. You know who told me that? Bob Dole.
Yeah, I'm sure Bob Dole had a lot of time to think about that. But think about also the change in 1980, because the Iowa caucuses for both parties date back to about the 70s. 1980, they have the Iowa caucuses, evangelical Christians just starting to become a force. Bush wins the Iowa caucuses. Bush in 1980 is pro-choice. Yeah. He is the last pro-choice Republican to win a major primary or caucus in the 40 years since then. Yeah. And by 1988, Bush has changed politically. He sees the tide is changing. But by 88, Iowa, the same state that sided with pro-choice Bush in 80, gives Pat Robertson second place, televangelist Pat Robertson. That was the shift that took place in that time.
And now look at the Iowa caucuses. The last three open Republican races, and arguably you could say four, because I'll go ahead and put George W. Bush in there in 2000, the winner had to be essentially an evangelical or evangelical adjacent.
Yeah, 64% of the electorate in the 2016 Iowa caucuses, Republican caucuses, identified as evangelical or born-again Christian. Ted Cruz won them by 11 points. Cruz won the state by 3. He won the state because of the evangelical Christian vote.
And ironically, today, the Christian Coalition has never been weaker as an organization.
And I think there's a big question, too, about, with Trump 2024,
right.
You see a guy like Pence come in. He thinks there's still a lane for an evangelical Christian to stand there on those grounds. It's an interesting test in Iowa.
Well, that electorate might split 3 or 4 ways,
right,
which we had not seen before. Always a pleasure to do history with you, Steve.
Happy
to see you.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.